So welcome, guys. This will be, I think, very different than any other presentation you're going to experience over the next 3 or 4 days, in part because we'll be having a flip chart delivered just as I'm beginning to talk. No, it's because there will be no PowerPoint. There's no PowerPoint, and that's intentional. One of the nice things about that is it gives me the flexibility, actually, to change the talk, which I did, actually. I changed it fairly dramatically this morning as I was listening to our presenters. And I realized that this was as much about teaching you guys about brainstorming and ideation process. It's as much about sort of the career thing. And so I wanted to incorporate some of the career stuff into this as we work through it. So let me start with, there we go, all right. Let me start with a trick. Thank you. Let me start with a trick that I came up with probably 35 years ago to help people know and understand something about their life's passion, right? Because as we learned from the speakers this morning, frankly, it should all start there, right? That wonderful book, Start With Why. It's all about the why and what's your essence and what are you about and what's your mission and all that kind of stuff. By the way, my mission, just so you know, is to popularize the structure of creativity. That's my life's work. I will, on my deathbed, I will say that's what I've done, and I'll be trying to come up with probably ideas on how not to die. So that's what I'll be doing. So that's my life's work. The trick I came up with was, and this came from self-reflection, was to look at the movies that you were particularly motivated by as a kid, all right? For me, the two movies, and this shows my age a little bit, of course they were reruns, so one was The Crimson Pirate with Burt Lancaster. I don't know if you ever saw that. The second was Swiss Family Robinson. Those two movies were my absolute favorite, just loved them. And you say, okay, so what? Who cares? But if you look at those movies, what they're about invention and creativity. The Crimson Pirate, Burt Lancaster, won by coming up with all these inventions with his teams to beat the bad guys, right? Swiss Family Robinson was what? The pirates were coming, but they had to come up with all these very cool things in order to beat the pirates, okay? Was this just common to me? I don't think so. I've asked a lot of people over the years, what were your favorite movies and why? And if you look behind that and the themes in them, you will often find that they tie into, quote, your life's purpose. I'm going to share a technique that I invented with and for an ex-IBMer who is a current futurist. And I said to him, well, what's your favorite movie? And he said, well, Blade Runner, because he wasn't sure that this would actually work. And then when he thought about it, he said it really was. So for you guys, you might do a list of your favorite movies. That's step one. Step two is to say, well, what are the important themes? What are the important actions that are going on in this movie that could inform my life? The hard thing is, you know, you don't know how it's going to work out, right? So you have to have a bit of trust. For me, I knew that it was ideas. And so when we're going for a third one. All right. Thank you. I knew there was ideas, but what do you do with that, right? How do you make a career, quote, out of ideas? And I had absolutely no clue. When I got out of college, I had cards printed up that said ideas, but what are you going to do with that, right? So it's all about how this passion then takes form, right? And I'm going to do this is the change, and this is why it's good not to have a PowerPoint. I'm going to do a technique with you guys a little later on that will help us invent some possible new jobs for you guys that might be a way to manifest that passion into an actual new job, okay? That exercise will be inventing jobs of the future, which is something I created with this futurist guy. So remind me not to forget to do that. I will do that with you guys. Okay? So what am I going to talk about today? I think that it's not possible to succeed in a unique and wonderful and profound way in your careers without the ability to come up with ideas. That is my bias as the presenter today. I think that you have to be able to recognize ideas, maybe that's a big idea, but also, frankly, have the tools to come up with ideas. Because why? because you need a lot of ideas to get a few good ones, frankly. Paul had mentioned my book, 21 Days to a Big Idea. Let me just tell you the story of how that happened. I had written my first book in 93, 94, 99% inspiration. That was great. The second book, I was asked to write that book, by the way, so that was easy. The second book came out in 2015. I went through that process of writing the proposal. Oh my gosh, the proposal was almost 100 pages. Can you imagine? Wiley Josie Bass and my agent sold it, and so we got that one done. That was, I went through the conventional route. The third book, my agent heard me give a talk on how to get big ideas, and she said, well, that should be a book for individuals now, for entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs. She said, that should be a book, and I said, well, I don't know if you know, but I just wrote a book, and I don't want to write another one, because what? It's really hard. It's hard writing a book, as it turns out. By the way, if you're thinking of writing a book, the trick is to break it down into pieces, just so you know. Don't write a book, write 36 articles and put them together, okay? The other trick, by the way, is have a deadline, meaning sign a contract, then you have to do it. You don't have a choice, okay? All right, so she said, well, write a book about this. And I said, I don't want to write a book, it's too hard. She said, oh, it can only be 30,000 words. It doesn't have to be 60,000 words. I can sell it without a proposal. And blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, if you can do all that, okay, I'll write it, thinking there's no way. And of course, then she did, right? So then I had to go write it. Oh my God. The genesis of that book, first the talk and then the book was, I have a friend, Bob Dorff. He is one of the famous people in the lean startup movement. If you don't know about that, you can read about it. But it's with Steve Blank. He co-wrote a book called The Startup Owner's Manual, okay? So Bob, I've known him for 20 years. We were on the homeless shelter group together, volunteer situation. And he came to me, he teaches at Columbia in the entrepreneurial school there. And he said, you know, my students, they're great, they're smart, they're creative, but frankly, their ideas are really bad for these new ventures. He said maybe 1 out of 12, 1 out of 15 is any good. And he said, if I see one more cuisine app, I'm going to shoot myself, basically, right? Because there are 800 cuisine apps out there, another 100 every month, and maybe 2 of them are making money. And it's like, can't you think of anything else other than a cuisine app? Give me a break. So he said to me, could you create a program that will help people come up with new ideas for entrepreneurial ventures? And I said, well, yes. That's what we learned this morning. You have to say yes to this stuff, thinking, I don't know what this would be, right? We teach creativity and ideation and innovation work with our clients, but these tend to be 1 or 2 day events, right? So I said, let me think about it. I went away on a vacation, and I realized there were some key principles to having this be a successful program. Number one, when you're trying to get an idea for a new venture, I have a strong bias. It's really important to have more than one idea. Why do I say that? Because with only one idea, if it's no good, what are you going to do? So you got to have, in my opinion, a couple dozen ideas, right? So that was one of the premises for the book. If you get a couple dozen ideas or a lot of ideas and you start talking to people and saying, is this idea any good? And they say it's no good, you don't feel bad. You can say, well, how about this? How about this? How about this? At some point, you're going to get an idea that's kind of pretty good, right? So that's one. Quantity is important in this work, right? The second thing is I realized that unlike our 1 or 2 day workshops, that time or soak time can be important, and research time. And you have all these ideas and you go talk to people, and this any good, not any good, all that kind of stuff. And so I wanted to do a program that was kind of over time, right? And I also knew that you needed to trigger people to get those ideas. So that was the third part of the book. It had all these ideation triggers. And that's what we're going to spend today working on. I'm going to show you a bunch of techniques. It's kind of a toolkit of these techniques that you can use, very practical. The stuff works. I proved it over 1,000 ideation sessions. This is empirically validated techniques. So it's not like this is, theoretical. This stuff works, and that's what I'm going to share with you today, a toolkit of these, okay? So I said, well, if I'm going to write this book and build this process, I should really work it on myself. I've got to walk my own talk, right? So I said, why don't I give myself the challenge of coming up with a big idea every day for 21 days, right? and then watch my process, watch what I do, et cetera, and then I can formalize that in a process for the reader. Is this hard? Turns out it's pretty hard. Coming up with a big idea every day is kind of hard, right? Long story short, that's what I did, and it's a very good program, and we just sold the rights to Vietnam, polite applause, no? Okay, and Turkey and other places around the world. So, and it's $10. Okay, so if you're really interested in coming up with a new idea, and you guys are regimen-oriented people, a lot of you, right? You have disciplines, you work with your clients on a daily basis. This is something you can do every day for 21 days, and I guarantee you'll get some big ideas if you follow the process. By the way, you don't have to do them in a row, so you could space them out. And the other thing that's really cool that I realized sort of as I was finishing the book is you don't even have to do it alone. You could have a big idea club, right, at work or with your friends, okay? All right, so that's sort of the setup here for you entrepreneurs, current entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs. If you don't want to start your own venture, but you want to be able to come up with new ideas at work that's going to advance your career, and again, I have that strong bias, you got to be an idea person. Again, this is my bias to advance in a big way at work. This is what I'm going to share with you today, okay? So, let's start with a very basic question. What is the difference between brainstorming and ideation, which is kind of the title of the talk, right? First of all, what is brainstorming? I guess I should answer these questions to make it quick and help you guys. Okay, I'll answer the questions here. So what is brainstorming? Brainstorming was it's actually a technique. It's becoming a generic thing. Yeah, let's go brainstorm. But it was actually a specific technique. It was invented in the late 1930s by Alex Osborne, the O of BBDO ad agency. 2 rules of brainstorming. What are they? I'll let you guys answer these. What are the 2 rules of brainstorming? There's no bad idea, which is absolutely totally false. I'm kidding, sort of, kind of, maybe. That's actually not fair to that comment. What that comment means is that you withhold judgment, right? John, that's a stupid-ass idea I ever heard of. John shuts down, and that's not a good environment for trust and brains coming up with ideas. It's usually framed as there are no bad ideas, which is not true. Because what? Most of the ideas are bad. Most of them are. How many are any good? If we do a session to invent a new Chips Ahoy cookie, which we've done, how many ideas might we generate in a day? 30. No, it's more than that. It might be 150, 200 maybe if we do really well. Okay, so 150 ideas. What percentage of that is any good? 3. Give it a shot. 3. We'd be out of business if it were only 3. It's more than that, but good guess. Actually, 1 to 2 to 3 is about the number that actually get launched. So in some sense, that's right. It's about 10 to 15%, right? So maybe 15 to 20 to 25 ideas are unique and wonderful and possible and worthy of further focus group research and figuring out the manufacturability and all that kind of stuff. So for you guys, 1 out of 10, 1 out of 8 ideas when you do this work, it's a numbers game, okay? So that's one rule of brainstorming, and the other rule, that withhold judgment, yes. The second rule is quantity will equal quality, which was implicit in what I just said, right? If you want to get a lot of good ideas, you got to get a lot more, okay? John Cleese, the English comic, said the key to his success, he would never ever stop at the first idea. Even though it could be great, he'd keep pushing. And I've had a lot of experiences with clients. I'll never forget, we were working with Coke on the Olympics to come up with ideas to promote their role in the Olympics. And this was in Atlanta, we did this. It was really cool at Turner Stadium. It was a lot of fun. When in the morning, though, we got this idea. It's like, well, let's do kind of a virtual reality tent, and all the press can come in, and they can have that direct kinesthetic experience, what it's like to ski or go through a high jump or shoot the biathlon, whatever it was. And that was a really good idea, right? A really cool idea. But that's a problem because we were there to generate a lot of ideas. And so it took me a while to get them off of that idea to consider other ideas. And that was successful. But just so you know, it's important not to stop at the first great idea. Okay? So that's brainstorming. We know that, right? This is sort of thinking 101. We got the brainstorming thing, and we all kind of know that. Research has shown almost not surprisingly if you really think about it, that brainstorming, while it was really important for its time, it was a contribution to the field, it actually doesn't work particularly well. Why is that? Why doesn't it work? And let me see if I can lead you to the answer. So if we're doing a session for Oreo cookie, forgive me, I'm going to give you a lot of mundane examples here just because it's easy, it's from our work. So we're doing an Oreo cookie assignment, right? How long has the Oreo cookie been around? Long time, yeah, over 100 years. So if I go in there and say, hey, who's got some cookie ideas, some Oreo cookie ideas? Which is brainstorming, right? Who's got some more Oreo cookie ideas? And more. Well, they don't need me to say that, right? And they've been thinking about it for 100 years anyway, so that's not going to get us there. Enter ideation. So what are ideation techniques? Have you heard that term, first of all, ideation? If you haven't heard that term, that is the, quote, current buzzword for all these creative thinking tools or techniques that now exist in the world. Since the late 1930s, there have been dozens and dozens and dozens of techniques that are designed to help people get new ideas in unique ways. Okay? So, what's the creativity thing? The creativity thing is really pretty simple. You got this thing, right, over here. Could be a problem, challenge. You got this thing over here. You mash them together and you get a new thing. You know, there have been 1,000 books that basically say that. This thing plus that thing equals a new thing, right? So if we're trying to invent a new Oreo cookie, we got this thing. What's that thing? It's not to say who's got some ideas. That doesn't help us. What's going to help us get new ideas? Anybody? You can capture it in one word. It's stimuli. Everything I'm going to be talking about today is stimuli. It's stuff over here that could mash up with this thing to create new ideas. Okay? It's all about the stimuli. So, we were inventing a new yogurt drink, right? What kind of stimuli could I use for a healthier yogurt drink? I'll try to at least tie this in a little bit to the conference here. A healthier yogurt drink. What's some stimuli we could use for that? Fruit, different kinds of fruits. Yes, what else? What? Say it, what? Probiotics, yeah, all sort of advances in nutrition and science could be kind of cool. What else? Yeah, it could be desserts, right? It could be menus, right? It could be food trends from around the world, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, I don't know if you know, but there's the New York Public Library has an online database of, I believe it's either 60 or 80,000 menus from history, right? So you can go on there and find out what the menu of the Waldorf Astoria was in 1890. Which is really kind of cool, right? And so we would print out some of those more interesting menus to trigger people in their thinking. Why? Because sometimes old is what? New, right? And so we spend a lot of the time in our work trying to figure out what could this stimuli be to trigger new ideas, okay? And that's what ideation is all about. So now you know what the ideation thing is, okay? So let's talk about some different techniques that you could use to ideate some ideas, all right? I'm going to do this. Actually, let me give you a model for how to think of these techniques first, okay? So I wrote my first book. It was called 99% Inspiration, and it was, you know, I was asked to write it, and I'm passionate about creativity and ideas and all the rest, and I wrote this thing. Again, it was 36 articles, but don't tell anyone, that I mashed up together, all right? I went back and read it 2 years after I wrote it. And I'm sure you've all had this experience. You go back and read something you wrote before. So what was my reaction to it when I read it? It was actually, I said, this is quite good. I was actually surprised. It was quite good, you know? And you've had that experience too. You say, wow, I was brilliant when I wrote this thing. What happened, you know? It was quite good, but I had missed an important thing, which was how do you categorize or organize these techniques? There was no clue in the book about this. There was no conceptual model or bigger way to think of all these ideation techniques. And by the way, these are both group and individual. I'm going to share a bunch of group ones with you and a couple of individual ones today. All right? Okay, so here was the quote model that I was lacking in the first book. So that's that. And actually, we could do that. And then there's that. And then there's that. Okay. So there we go. So we got that now, right? Okay, I'll explain it. You're looking at me like I'm nuts, right? Okay. So what is this? These are questions, right? There are a whole bunch of techniques around questioning. What does questioning have to do with creativity?
Pulls in information.
It pulls in information. I'm going to repeat this for the cameras, right? So it pulls information. Questions certainly do that, or it says it shows a lack of information. It says, give me information. What else do questions? Why else are questions important to the creative process? Okay, we'll take a mini excursion here. Here we go. I don't know if you remember the talk this morning. It was about saying what? Yes to what? To things that you don't know nothing about, right? That you're afraid of, okay? We have to do that every day, otherwise we'd be out of business. So we get these calls. I can't share this one because I don't have the time, but it's actually in the handout. We got a call from an insurance company in the Midwest, Catholic Knights Insurance Company. They've since renamed it. Anyway, they had read my first book. They called me up and said, can you help us sell more life insurance to Catholics? Who is this? You know, right? You're saying, who's calling me, right? What's that all about? And what's my first question? Why just Catholics? Don't you sell to the Jews and the Muslims and the Buddhists? And they said, well, no, it was our charter, and we've actually been sued by the Jews and the Muslims and the Buddhists, but our charter is held up. And so they said, could you help us sell more life insurance to Catholics? And I said, what? Yes. Love to. Thinking, this is crazy, right? How am I going to do this, right? But that happens all the time, okay? So, back to the first excursion here. We got a call from Black & Decker, and they said, can you help us invent new irons? Not surprisingly. And I said, what? Of course, love to. But from a questioning standpoint, we changed their question. We didn't say, can we help you invent new irons, or can we get the group to invent new irons? What did we change it to? This gets to a little bit to Heather's point about the 4 Ps here. What did we change it to? Anybody? Another way to say it is, who cares about irons? It's not the thing itself that you're concerned about, it's what? It's the benefit. It's the benefit, right? It's getting the wrinkles out, right? Who cares how we deliver it, right? It's the benefit of that thing, right? So we originally defined it as what? Can we invent new, jump in, by the way, if you feel that, okay, anti-wrinkle devices, right? Can we invent new anti-wrinkle devices, all right? And actually, I'll just tell you that actually when we went broader than that, we said, can you invent new garment care devices, okay? And this is important for you guys, no matter what industry or business you're in, to make sure you're, quote, solving the right problem, okay? Or to frame it in such a way that might liberate creativity, right? Can we invent a new exercise routine is one way to think of it, yes? But maybe can we invent a new way for people to self-actualize within the world of health, or whatever it is? Framing of the challenge is critical, and it's a creative act, by the way. And so before you go in and immediately do stuff, right, you may want to step back and say, wait a second, are we solving the right problem here? Okay, or have we framed it in the correct way? So ultimately, how did this work? Garment care devices. It was great. And by the way, we got some incredible new iron ideas that I thought we would never ever get. Why? Because if we had started with irons, I don't think we could have gotten there. And why do I say that? I say that because irons have so many preconceptions about what an iron is. We all know what an iron is, right? It's got that metal thing, it's got the holes in it, it's got the handle, it's got the steam thing. When you go into a session or a creative moment where you have all these preconceptions, it's really tough to get out of them. So you want to start by sort of breaking that up, and that's one way to do it. So forget about irons, get to the benefit. Anti-wrinkle devices, you know? It's like, you don't care about a drill, you care about the hole, right? It's the benefit, okay? All right, so this was our excursion. We're back. We're over here, right? So questions. How you frame something is important. The only example that I would give that is not original to us, and I'm just going to share it because it's a good example, I think. There's a famous example from the creativity literature. A guy built a building in New York City. He doesn't put enough elevators in, okay? He really should have put in 6 when he put in 5. How do you define that challenge? Where do I get the extra $100,000 to put the elevator in, right? Well, that's one way. How else could you define it? How do I move people more efficiently? So maybe you program the elevators, right? How do I make it less important that people go up the elevators? So maybe you put the telemarketing firms on the 1st and 2nd floor and all the people with big offices on top floor, so you need less elevator capacity, right? How do I get more people in the elevator? You license the Anorexic Society of America on the top floor. I'm joking, it's not funny, but that's an answer, right? You know? How do you increase the capacity of our current elevators? Maybe you put a cab on top of an elevator, et cetera, et cetera. Yes? How do you encourage people not to take the elevator? So what? Stairs, and we have what? A heart healthy building now. And you have, water stations, et cetera, okay? The quote answer, and there's no one answer because you can define it in a million ways, is how do we make the wait, the W-A-I-T, seem less long? So what happens then? What do? You put videos. In this case, they put mirrors in the hallways. People are primping and preening and saying who speeded up the elevators, right? So what's the point here? The point here of that story is, again, it's how you frame the challenge that's important. And I wanted to share that story because that's, again, a creative act. Okay? And if you frame it in very different ways, and there's a technique called 20 questions, there's another technique we use called questioning assumptions. It's all about framing it in appropriate ways. Okay? By the way, any technique I share with you in a more detailed way, I created how-to sheets. So when you go back with your teams at work, you'll say, I know we talked about that brain walking thing. How do you do that? They're kind of recipe cards that are in this handout. And also, if you get some of the books, they'll tell you how to do it too. But the recipe cards that are free, these handouts for you guys, step 1, put paper on the wall. I mean, they're very simple to do. Now, some of you, when you want to go back and do this stuff with your teams, you might not feel confident about it, right? Because you've never done it before. And I would say, so what? Because it's going to be better than saying, got any ideas? Got any more ideas? That's one thing. The second thing is, this stuff doesn't always work, right? In fact, it doesn't work 85% of the time. So you don't have to defend these techniques. If it doesn't work, say, it didn't work, let's try another one. What the hell? Because why? It's a numbers game. It's a numbers game. And if you do a session and you get 3 ideas out of the whole day, or even 1 idea, that could be revolutionary. Yeah? So, the Chips Ahoy session, Brownie Chips Ahoy came out of that. It's now a big platform for them, and it's a huge business. Well, that was, quote, 1 idea that came out of that session. What's the value of that? Literally hundreds of millions of dollars. Okay? All right. So, that's the questioning thing. All right? What is this? That's an eye. So what is that? A grunge? No, not focus. Good guess. Vision. Visual techniques. So there are a whole bunch of, quote, visual techniques, right? So picture prompts, collaging, mind mapping. By the way, how many of you guys know mind mapping here? Anybody? 1, 2. All right, I will show you how to do mind mapping towards the end, because I do think it's a very important personal technique to have, critical actually. So these are visual techniques. Actually, let me take another excursion here. These are really good for insights, right? I wasn't going to tell this story, but I'll tell it because it's kind of fun, and we have a lot of women in the audience. I know that sounds wrong, but so what? Okay, here we go. So we were hired by Clairol. Actually, they were bought by Procter & Gamble, and we were hired to help them invent new hair color for older women. So when they called, what did I say? Yes. What did I say? Love to, of course. Thinking, so what do? You go do research, you talk to people, try to figure out what's going on in this category, what the needs are, unmet needs. So they're called ethnographies, where you go to people's homes, right, and you have them talk, when you're not in the shower with them, but you could have them talk, or the bathroom, you could have them talk through, they open up the package, they take it out, you go through very detailed steps about what they're doing to really learn, does it kind of all work. So one of the projective techniques we used in that case was collaging, which is very good for insight work, right? So we had women create a collage of how they felt just before they really needed to get their hair colored, right? And then we had them create a collage of how they felt afterwards, right? I to this day, I still can't believe it. Over here was Armageddon. I mean, it was like this unbelievable, dystopias, this sort of, the world was coming to an end over here for these women. And over here on the right side, after, it was like running through the fields and brightness and light and pop, all this kind of, and I'm like, are you kidding me? But of course I'm a male and I really didn't get the importance of why my wife, she doesn't do it anymore, but would go to New York and spend $400 to get her hair colored. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? She said, well, yeah, but I sort of understood, because in one of these home ethnographies, a woman, I looked at her collage, I said, what's going on? And she said, and I'll never forget this line because it was the essence to me of what was going on. She said, she said, if I don't feel good about my hair, I don't feel good about myself, and then I don't feel I can contribute to the world. Oh my God. So hair color is about contributing to the world, is that what you're telling me? She said, yes, absolutely. So, so that's a really interesting insight, right? And you see how important this category is, and that led to gray solutions and the idea of being able to keep your hair color longer and all this kind of stuff. Okay? All right. So that's visual stuff. And we will do, as I said, we'll put up here mind mapping, because I want to show you that technique. Okay? All right, mind mapping. What's down here? What is that? That's an equal sign. Okay. And what is that? What does that have to do with creativity? This is actually in my youth, when I printing out those cards, ideas, I did a tremendous amount of study about the creative processes of great people through history, which is really fun, And what you'll find is that inventors, this is their, if you will, preferred mode of creating new things. It's the company Synectics was kind of founded on this, and so what is the equal sign? What is that about? What does that mean?
Balance.
Balance, good guess, no? It's about comparing this thing with that thing, right? Analogs, similes, metaphors, associations, connections, whatever you want to call them, it is how does this thing relate to that thing, okay? So, and you see this over and over and over again in the history of invention. So Samuel Colt's inspiration for the six-shooter revolver was A, the Big Dipper, B, a Mozart symphony, C, a pitchfork he threw into the side of a barn, or D, a ship's wheel. Okay? Samuel Colt's inspiration for the six-shooter revolver. Anybody want to take a guess?
All of the above.
No, it was just one of them. It's not a trick question. It was actually the ship's wheel, right? Because what? It's the clutching mechanism of the ship's wheel that he applied to the six-shooter revolver. Okay? Eli Whitney, the cotton gin, was trying to say, how do you get the seeds out of the cotton, right? What does he do? He's in Nathan Green's widow's farm, the Revolutionary War hero, and he sees a cat reaching through a fence trying to grab a chicken. And he said, I got it. What? So if you've ever seen a cotton gin, right? It's got like these spikes coming up. It kind of grabs the cotton, and then there's a bar that knocks it off, right? So the spikes are like the cat claws, and the bar knocks it off. The spikes make the cotton kind of flat that enables you to knock off the seeds. but there are hundreds and hundreds and thousands of examples of what we call principal transfer, right? And so when I was sitting here, I said, "Oh, I got to come at least one example in the world of sports from work we did." So, and I've actually never told this story because I don't like name dropping stuff, but anyway, I'll tell it anyway, just for you guys. So, and the camera, I guess. So, we were actually, and I can share this. We were asked by the USTA, United States Tennis Association, to help them reinvent the Open. How cool is that? That one was easy to say yes, right? And so one of the techniques we did, and we had, famous people in the room, including Jim Courier and all these wonderful players, right? He was number one and all this stuff. And so there's a technique we used. It's kind of idea hooks. And you'll recognize the wisdom of this technique where you say, let's get some events that are really cool, right? Some really cool events, and let's transfer the principles from those events to maybe reinventing the US Open, okay? So I gave, a person Macy's Day Parade, right? Or a Broadway show, or even a summer wedding, right? So, just a kind of funny story. So Courier got summer wedding, right? And I said, well, do some associations off of that. What are some associations of the word wedding? Bridal party, right? So could you somehow have a bridal party at the US Open? I don't know if that'll work. What else do you have of a wedding? Oh, you give certain gifts. Could you give certain gifts to people, et cetera, et cetera? You're what? You're transferring the principles, right? So he took summer wedding, and I said, write down an essence of that thing for you. And he said, expensive, because he had just gotten married. And I said, no, it's typically 2 words. And he said, very expensive. So anyway, by the way, he was great at ideation. He was really focused on everything I was talking about and was really good at it. But one of the ideas that came out of that session was, I don't know if you noticed, but now they kind of treat the nighttime events almost like it's Broadway, right? The lights and going and all this. I don't particularly like it, but that came from that trigger of using a Broadway play. That's what triggered how they did the US Open, okay? So what is that about? The important thing here is it's principal transfer, and you guys do this yourself. I know you do it already. You're driving along, you have a problem, you see a billboard, and you said, oh my gosh, there's a kid running through the field. I could use that kid running through the field to invent this new exercise program, or whatever it is, right? That's the way that we typically come up with these ideas. When Henry Ford was trying to come up with a better way to what? Mass produce cars, what was the inspiration for that? Anybody know? It was actually a slaughterhouse. Because why? What's the principal transfer here?
Efficiency.
Yeah, it's efficiency. Do you know what they called slaughterhouses at the turn of the century, by the way, the turn of the 19th century? They actually called them disassembly plants. And so to come up with assembly plant was not that big a stretch, right? But it was basically about principal transfer. Okay? All right. So that's that one. So what do we got here? We got what? Questions. Visuals. Principal transfer. Okay. All right. What's this last one? This last one is sort of everything else. No, it's really fantasy and role playing and that kind of stuff. So there are a bunch of techniques in here, like the wish technique is really a really cool technique. So the wish technique, you wish for the impossible, and then you try to make that impossible real, okay? In one of my books, I talk about how I got a job using the wish technique, which I don't think I have time to go into, so I won't. But you'll have to read one of the books to get that. Okay. What time? We end at 2:30?
2:30.
2:30. Okay, so we're halfway there. Okay. Okay. All right. So there's the wish technique, and again, this is fantasy. It could be role play. Yeah. If you have a personnel issue, you might do what's called a great thinkers technique, where you have people role play somebody and come up with if Elton John were part of your team, right? What would Elton John recommend that you do to promote your place, right? Or whomever, okay? All right, so I want to talk about one of these fantasy techniques just because I think it's fun. there's a technique, we sort of invented it, but also I think other people invented it, so we don't try to take credit for that one, but it's called the worst idea technique, okay? So this one, instead of coming up with good ideas for something, you come up with bad ideas, right? So we were working with a large information services company, and they sell information. So what's the worst possible idea for these guys? Give it away, right? You know, So we had them do the worst idea technique. That was one of the worst ideas. And the way this technique works is you say, okay, as bad, there are really two strategies in this worst idea technique. What you do, by the way you facilitate is you'll come up with 15 or 20 worst ideas. Worse. Yeah, and then, by the way, you want to disinvite HR from these techniques because, then you torture the person, then you change them to you come up with bad, awful, terrible ideas, right? Oh yeah, we want soup that you throw up, all this kind of weird stuff, right? Then what do? You use that weird, bad stuff to trigger good ideas. Now, what are the two basic strategies for doing that? What's the obvious one? Do the opposite, okay? So if you have throw up soup, and by the way, this is not particularly effective, what's the opposite of throw up soup? Soup you don't throw up on. It doesn't help me, right? Okay, so that's not particularly effective. The more interesting strategy, you say, as bad as this is there something I can take out of it to turn into something kind of cool, right? So throw up soup, you might think about it and say, well, wait a second. There are people in hospitals who are sick, they really can't eat anything. Could we develop a special soup where they can keep it down, so they don't throw up? Is there some medically oriented soup that would help them keep it down? Or if you have, soup with bugs in it, you say, well, as bad as that idea is, maybe we actually take that literally and just say, for 12 and 14-year-old boys, it's, bug soup or body part soup that's tomato or whatever. I mean, this might sell, right, with the teenage boys, et cetera, okay? So that's the worst idea technique. In the case of giving information away for this information services company, they're famous and they tend to do big company profile stuff. But they said, we're missing the smaller company market, right? And so the worst idea was to give the information away. They said, well, we could do listings of these smaller companies for free. But there are two things there. One is we have an upsell where they get a more dynamic or robust profile, and we could charge money for that, and it will make our database that much more robust. And so that became a multi-million-dollar division for them. By what? By just doing the worst idea. Okay? Now, if you're in a politically sensitive situation, we've done a lot of work with pharma, for instance, and we do worst idea, and so and we have technographers in the room. These are people taking electronic meeting notes. What we did was the client said, sorry, this cannot leave the room, because we had all these, torture the person, kill the babies, all this really weird stuff, right? And so we had to expunge everything from the record because they didn't want it out. Even though it was a technique, people could take it wrong. This company's trying to kill people, right? Okay, so that's why you don't want to invite HR into the room sometimes, right? Okay, when you do this stuff. I'm joking, sort of, but it's a little risky, right? It's a little risky. I'm going to talk about when and where you might use worst idea in a second. Actually, let me do that before I forget, and then I want to talk about another version of this that we created. So over here. When would you use worst idea?
When you can't come up with a good idea.
Yes, when you can't come up with a good idea. If it's one of the wonderful things about the technique, and it sounds silly, right? It's a stupid technique. It's kind of ridiculous, right? When we've analyzed the result of our, quote, ideation sessions, we found that worst idea doesn't generate a lot of ideas, but the ones that it does generate are often some of the winners. So it's a highly productive technique in terms of quality. Now, why would that be? We've thought a lot about that. I think in part because it takes pressure off people. And I'll say in the session, wait a second, that idea's not bad enough. Push it, I want it even worse. No, worse than that. Does anyone take offense at that? No. They know that we're playing. They know that we're having fun. And the other thing about the play is that it loosens people up, right? And it becomes enjoyable, and it's really kind of fun, and it takes all the pressure off. And then if we're talking about it from a spiritual perspective, the sort of yin and yang of things, it's almost like you can't have happiness without depression or whatever. You can't have dark without light. You sometimes can't have a bad idea without sometimes triggering a good idea, right? So there's some profound things going on in this technique, and it's really been very successful for us as a technique. Now, when would you use it? You might use it if you have an environment where people are kind of negative at work, frankly. Right? You know, okay, let's come up with bad ideas on how to promote our business. Well, I get all these bad ideas. And some people, they're called mismatchers in the psychological research. You know, sometimes they're bankers, you know, whatever. Can I have a loan? No. Sometimes lawyers. Is this okay? No, there could be an atomic blast. And that, you know, they're people, not that it's bad, but they're tasked with finding out what the problems could be. Oh my God, these people love this technique. I was doing a talk for 125 bankers on creativity, dying. I'm up front dying. I pulled out worst idea. Oh my gosh, you thought it was a whole, oh, you could double the ATM fees. You could close at 2 o'clock versus 3 o'clock. You know, the banker humor, they're all excited, right? But that led to some very interesting ideas. Like one, take the money. Let's just take their money. That's a bad idea, right? Take the change, right? Do you remember that campaign from Bank of America? Not take the change, invest the change. You know, sort of round down and use that as an investment tool for savings. Okay? All right. So when people are negative, when you don't have much time, you can do it in 30 minutes, 40 minutes, right? It's effective. By the way, all this stuff, you don't have to do it all in a day. You could grab some pizza, have people come in and do this with them. It's not a big deal, right? Okay. So we had that worst idea technique, and then we get this call from the ASPCA. What does that stand for? American Society of Prevention of Cruelty in Animals, okay? And they called us up, and this was a really weird call. And they said what? They said, can you help us get New Yorkers to adopt pit bulls who were formerly owned by drug dealers? I'm not kidding. That was the call, okay? What happened, the police department had taken over and they're arresting all these drug dealers and they had these semi-abused dogs, and so and it just breaks your heart. The ASP pit bulls often, are big dogs, and they would retrain these dogs, and you know, so as part of the research I went and I met the dogs and they're fantastic. You know, they're just, I almost brought one home, but we have a little dog, and my wife would have freaked out, but they're wonderful, right? But so how do you get people, you know, it's a tough sell, right? If you have a small New York apartment, how are you going to get them to adopt these dogs, right? So that was the marketing challenge. And we did a bunch of techniques during the day, and we could have done what? Worst idea, but I felt weird, right? Because then you're going to, you know, it could get really weird with the dog thing, and I said, okay, is there some way I can change this technique to make it more palatable for these people that love dogs, including myself? And so what I came up with was just doing a technique called the silly idea technique, all right? Which is kind of crazy, right? I mean, it's kind of negative, but it's not negative, it's kind of fun, all right? So it's silly. So what's a silly idea for getting people to adopt dogs? What's a silly idea? One of the ideas was dress them up in Halloween costumes, right, and do the parade, you know, in Lower Manhattan, right? And, you know, they're cute, right? You dress them up, that's one idea. What's another idea? Another idea that I liked, a silly idea, was, well, don't really have people adopt them, do virtual adoptions, right? So that's a silly idea. Set up cameras, and people can sort of virtually adopt them, right? And what happens? They fall in love, as I did, you know? You see them every day, and so... And then another idea was take the dogs out for a walk, ask a New Yorker just to hold it and run away. But we didn't do that one. But you know, these are the kind of ideas that come out of that. Okay? So if you're worried about the worst idea, and this is all in the fantasy area, you can do silly idea. And that should be fun with your team. Okay? All right. So how many techniques have we talked about here so far? whole bunch, right? But let me give you, actually, let me give you one that you absolutely positively can use that's really, really simple. Okay, really, really simple. When we had been hired by both Dentine and Trident to help them invent new gums, or new positionings for gums. And week one, I was with the Trident people, and I did a technique called brain writing, and I triggered the brain writing, okay? What is brain writing? Anybody heard of that technique called brain writing? And this is the one you can absolutely positively do with your teams that's really, really simple. The way it works is you're in a meeting and it's going nowhere, right? You say, stop, stop. Everybody take out a piece of paper. I would like you, and say there are 5 people in the meeting, right? I would like you to write an idea down on how we deal with this challenge. Just write it down. The challenge is you're not triggering them, but that's okay. Write an idea down. Then what do? You pass the papers. Okay, and you can have them put their names on the back if you want. You pass the papers. Each person passes, right? The person next, you get at somebody else's thing, and you're asked then to either build on that idea or have it trigger a whole new idea. Okay? Pass, 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 pass. There are 5 people in the room. It goes back to the original owner. Now you've got a sheet that's got 5 ideas on it, right? And then you say, okay, circle one you like. Okay, let's continue with the meeting. And you're off and running. How long did that take? 10 minutes? I don't know, right? Is it effective? You don't trigger it. It's like brainstorming it, that there are no mental triggers. You don't have a thing of over here and over here to mash it up. But actually, once you do a round, the other people's ideas are triggers. So it is okay, right? So everybody got it? Is this simple? By the way, all the stuff I'm sharing today, it's not rocket science. And this gets back to, even if you do it poorly, I never really completed that thought, it's better than saying, got any ideas? So I want you guys to feel that you can use this stuff, all right? So that's brain writing, right? Simple, simple, simple. That's in the creativity literature before I developed this brainwalk thing. So that was week one with the Trident people. Week 2, I had the Dentine people, and this was to position gum. Positioning is what you say about it. That's all, what you want people to think about it, okay? So we're with the Dentine people, and I sort of liked the brain writing thing, but I couldn't repeat myself because they had group gum people. So some people were both Trident and Dentine. So then I said, ugh. So basically what I did is I just put flip chart papers on the walls. And I didn't do it at the time, but we've since learned that it makes sense. And then you form teams of 2. And you put them up, and if you have 20 people in the room, you have 10 stations, right? So each person goes to the wall. Each person goes to the wall, and maybe you trigger them in some way. I'll talk about triggers in a second. They write an idea down, and then they rotate. It's like idea volleyball, and you rotate, and you rotate, and you build. It's very much like brain writing, right? In that you're rotating the people, not the papers now, right? Okay? It turned out to be a much better way to do, quote, brain writing. Why? There's several reasons why it was better. Anybody? I'll help if you don't want to suggest anything. Number one, the physical action is important, right? Just moving is kind of cool. You're literally changing your perspective. You're moving to a new place, right? That's number one. Number 2, the ideas are public, which is cool, right? Because we found that on breaks, people walk the walls and say, oh my gosh, they'll make connections, because it's like you've painted the room now with ideas. It's reinforcing for the group. Look at all the ideas we had. I remember I was doing a session for a credit card company. We did the brainwalk, the triggered brainwalk, and the client comes up to me, it's like 11 in the morning, he said, we're done. It was an all-day session. Look at all the ideas we had. I said, we're not done, but you get a lot of ideas very quickly. The other thing too that's really, really important is that I think you had mentioned that sort of introvert-extrovert thing, or maybe both you guys did. What's the deal with the introverts in a brainstorming or ideation session? Or let me put it this way, what's the deal with the extroverts? You can't shut them up, right? I mean, and they're monopolize the conversation, who knows, okay? And the introverts are sort of in the corner drooling, but they have maybe some really interesting ideas, right? This deals with that. The introverts feel very comfortable writing stuff down. Maybe it's one or two of them, and they're kind of here. They don't have to present to the whole group, right? It's very non-threatening. So it's a very powerful technique for that introvert-extrovert thing. Okay? What else? What else? In any group you will probably have hierarchies, right? We've done sessions where Fortune 500 sessions where we have the CEO, the president, the executive vice president, the senior vice president. Oh my God, give me a break, right? And what's the deal? People do, if you do a brain walk, people are kind of like this at the beginning to seeing what the CEO is writing, but then you rotate, you change partners, nobody cares after that. So it breaks down hierarchy, which is another powerful thing about the brain walking. Okay? Again, all this stuff is sort of listed in the how-to sheets for you guys, just so you'll know. Okay? So that's brain walking. Now, how do you trigger it? Let me give you a real-world example. And this is the only time that it was a little rocky. We had been hired by L'Oreal to, another hair care example. I didn't even notice that. We had been hired by L'Oreal to go around the country and do ideation sessions with salon owners. If you know salon owners, they are a really interesting group of people, right? You know, you got the tattoos and you got the wig, you know, all this weird stuff going on. So we're, quote, teaching them about creativity. We did a triggered brain walk was one of the exercises we did. So how do you trigger new hairstyles? What could you use to trigger new hairstyles? What stimuli could you use to trigger new hairstyles? Anybody? What? Nature. Nature's a great one, right? Really cool things in nature. Oh, there's the beaver head look, you know, or whatever, right? Okay, what else? What else could you do to trigger? It could, what's that? Space, like new technologies, future stuff. That'd be kind of cool, right? Yeah, all that stuff is good. We actually used sort of buildings, really interesting architecture, and we also used kind of jewelry and chandeliers and really cool kind of home furnishings and all that kind of stuff. We said use this as your inspiration, which, by the way, fashion designers will often do a lot. Use this, you've seen Project Runway, they do it all the time, right? Use this as inspiration for coming up with new hairstyles, right? So we did that, and you looked around the room and you couldn't believe these things. They were so cool. And then I said, okay, now rotate, and I want everybody to go to the next sheet, and I want you to either build on this or have it trigger a new idea. And they're like, what do you mean rotate? I said, go to the next station. What do you mean? Is somebody going to touch my thing? They were freaked out that somebody, the artiste, that somebody would touch their creation. I said, okay, don't touch the creation, do a separate sheet, but other than that, it tends to work. People don't seem to mind to build on each other's ideas. Okay? I need to keep checking time because I realized I really want to do this one exercise because I want to sort of invent some jobs of the future. Okay, thank you. All right. So, what else do I want to share here? Oh, I got to share mind mapping and the mashup technique, and I got 25 minutes. Okay. All right, so here we go. All right, so let's do the mashup technique. There's a technique called semantic intuition. This is what I changed listening to this morning. I thought it'd be fun to invent some new careers in your field. Okay? So we'll do this very quickly, but semantic intuition is what led to the Brownie Chips Ahoy, for instance. So we had 3 columns of word. We had desserts, we had product forms, and we had ingredients. So we had, desserts, brownie. We had forms, layer, for instance, and we had nuts or something. That led to the Brownie Chips Ahoy. So that's what we're going to do here. So I'd like to come up with, when we do this, we have a workshop we do called Inventing Jobs of the Future that I mashed up with this futurist from IBM. By the way, guys, if you're looking to invent a new discipline or do something that's never been done in your field, find somebody from a different field, mash up your talents and create something new. It's really cool, right? So anyway, so I mashed up with this futurist from IBM and I used this semantic intuition technique. So usually we do industries, but in your case, let's do some that are relevant to the world of sports, health and, what do we call ourselves?
Health, fitness, sports medicine.
Thank you, health, fitness, sports medicine. So what are some, if you will, I don't know if you'd call them disciplines or sub-disciplines, or what are we?
Clinical exercise physiology.
Okay, clinical exercise physiology. Do we?
CEP, they'll know what
Okay, CEP. Okay, what else? Personal what?
Personal trainer.
Personal trainer. Okay, that we're getting in some ways to the next topic, but that's okay. Next area. Okay, what else?
Strength and conditioning.
What strength and condition? Great. Strength, condition. What else?
Exercise.
What exercise? What? Group exercise. Terrific. Love it. Okay, some more of those. What else? Corporate wellness. Terrific. Corporate wellness. Okay, and we'll just take one more because of time. Normally we do like 20 of these, but we'll just do one more. What?
Health coaching.
Health coaching. Terrific. Okay. All right, then let's do sort of new technologies not necessarily in your field. In fact, out of your field could be fine. By the way, if you look at Peloton, I know a guy who's working with Nautilus and they're freaking out, right? Because Peloton disrupted the whole industry, right? By what? Using new technology with the streaming, right? So some new technologies, what do we got? Telemedicine, okay? What else? New technology. So this could be AI, right? Or robotics, right? Are all new technologies. What else? Blockchain is a new technology, right? Or a new service. What else? This is where you guys jump in. What? Holograms. So VR. We'll do, VR and AR, right? Virtual reality, alternate reality. What else? Augmented reality. Excuse me. What? 3D printers. Yeah, additive manufacturing. 3D printers. Great. Okay, terrific. All right, and finally, let's do some job titles. Heather became what? A writer. She didn't expect it, but she became a writer, okay? Or maybe she did, but she's, a journalist. What else? Some other, quote, job titles or whatever that are not necessarily related to the field here.
Fitness consultant.
Okay, so that's within the, let's just say consultant, okay? We'll say consultant. What else? Again, this does not have to be coach. It does not necessarily have to be directly related to what you're doing now. But it could be something a talent you have or something you're interested in. Doctor, yes, okay. What else? What?
Talent acquisition.
Oh, great. Talent acquisition. By the way, just so you know, our clients have now asked us to do sessions on talent acquisition and retention because of the talent wars. It's become a big deal. So if you're you may be well poised for the future with your careers. Okay, what else?
Salesperson.
Salesperson, great. And one more. Data analyst, terrific, very good. Okay, all right, so now what do? Do you think? Yeah, it's Mad Libs. Am I dating myself? It's Chinese menu, it's mashups, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so let's, by the way, we use a version of technique called problem redefinition with the Catholic Knights people, and it wound up increasing sales by 52%. You can read that in the how-to literature, okay? Here we go. Let's pick 3 interesting ones. What? Corporate wellness is a good one. Another one. Group exercise, and a third one. Personal trainer, okay? Pick 3 here, 3 interesting technologies. Telemedicine, AI, and holograms. Terrific, okay? And then finally over here, 3 interesting. Sales, why not? What else? What? Talent acquisition is a good one. And a final one, writer. Okay. All right, so now what? So your job could be an expert who is talking about how you're a writer, and it's how AI is going to affect personal training. Would that be kind of fun? It might be. By the way, we did this, or maybe not, I don't know. We actually did this with a graduate class, and this woman said, oh my gosh, I was thinking that I had to either focus on fashion or Internet of New Things and technology. And she suddenly had the eureka moment. She said, oh my God, I can combine the two and use Internet things that are in fashion. Okay? All right, so let's do another one. Group exercise, holograms, and talent acquisition. It's kind of cool, right? Even if you just, by the way, even if you just two of them, group exercise and holograms, you know, yes, would be kind of cool. Are we getting it here? Okay. And then finally, corporate wellness, telemedicine, and sales, where you could be a salesman who perfects a sort of telemedicine approach, to corporate wellness. Would make sense for corporations, I think, right? So these are all jobs that I don't, exist. I don't know if they exist, whatever, but you guys could use this process to invent your future, right? And what you'll find if you do that passion work up front, based on what movies you love, you'll all of a sudden, oh, I know that I'm passionate about this and I'm passionate about that. When you start making these combinations, all of a sudden some of these will light up for you as future jobs you could create. Okay? All right. Any questions on that technique? It's fun, right? Do it with a group. Get a group of your friends or coworkers together. As entrepreneurs and business owners, you've got to find things that are unique. This will absolutely help you find things that are unique that you can share and talk about. Okay? How much time?
15 minutes.
Okay. All right. So everybody got this, right? So I hope who's going to do this or try this? All right. Cool. Okay. This one, it's sort of like problem redefinition, which I have in the how-to sheets, but I think, there's an article I wrote for Fast Company magazine on how Sting invents new songs. It's in the literature, or the contact sheet, whatever, the resources. If you click on that, that'll tell you exactly how to do this technique, okay? By the way, if you're curious about how Sting writes new songs, what he does is he'll name the song first and then figure out what it is. And that's what this is. This is naming the job first and then figuring out what it is, right? And there's tremendous background in the creativity literature on this, where you'll find Neil Simon actually named The Odd Couple, the play, first and then wrote it, right? William Goldman, the screenwriter who recently passed away, he asked one daughter, what do you want me to write a story about? She said, oh gosh, I'd love to write a story about getting married. He asked that was the older daughter. The younger daughter, what do you want to write a story about? Oh, being a princess. Princess Bride. He mashed them together, and of course, if you've read the book and seen the movie, it's unbelievable. But it started with that title. Last example I'll give is during the 40s and 50s, the B movie producers, what would they do? They'd name a movie. They'd actually do a poster with a visual. The swamp thing that ate, Philadelphia or ate Chicago, whatever. Then what would they do? They'd go out and test the poster and the title. And if it got a high test, they'd go make the movie. Right? Okay. So that's what it's about. It's about naming this idea first and then figuring out what it is. Okay. So here we go. This last one, I really wanted to share. We'll go over to these two over here. This last one I really wanted to share because I think it's a critical skill that you guys can really help in your jobs and success in life, because we will have to write. We do have to make presentations. So this mind mapping thing, it was not invented by us. It was invented by Tony Buzan, an Englishman, in the 1960s, mid-1960s, so it's been around a long time. It's a terrific technique. I wish I had known this when I was growing up. When I was growing up, here I've written 3 books. I get C's and D's in writing in elementary school. Why? Because the teachers would say, well, you have to write an outline. And I'd say to myself, I don't know what I'm going to say. How am I going to write a friggin' outline, right? So what this does is this sort of mirrors how the brain works, right? So if I say the word elephant, what do you think of? What? Trunk. If I say trunk, what do you think of? Suitcase. If I say suitcase, what do you think of? Travel. So we went from elephant to travel in 4 steps, right, or whatever it is. But that's how the brain organizes stuff, right? And so this leverages that. And if you look at the cross-section of the brain and the axons and dendrites, it kind of looks like this, but we'll get to that. Okay, so there are 4 elements to mind mapping. By the way, you can take a 2-day course on it, and what they do for 2 days, I have no clue, because you can learn it in about 4 minutes, which is good, because that's how much time we have left. Okay. So here we go. So there are 4 elements. Let's do a mind map of what I talked about today. This is a tricky way to do review, huh? Okay, so what did I talk about today? What? Okay, so we got a trigger thing. Okay, so we trigger ideas, and that's about ideation. And if I could somehow do a gun, which this will get funky, and no, it's a little weird. But let's say that's a trigger. Okay, let's say that's a trigger. Okay, sorry. What else? What else did I talk about today? What else? Oh, we were triggering ideas off of this, right? Or it was ideas, right? Okay, what else did I talk about today? You were here, right? Wasn't that long ago? There's something called the recency effect, where you actually remember things that were recent. Okay, go ahead. What else? What else did I talk about? Yeah, so I had a paradigm, sort of paradigm of, or a classification, right? Classification of techniques, right? What was one of those? Visuals was one. What was another one? Questions, right? Okay, so we talked about that, right? Okay, all right. What else did I talk about? Or what else did I do? I told some stories, didn't I? Okay, so what was the story I told? The what?
Not just creating the iron, but...
Oh yeah, so the iron story, the Black & Decker story. So if I drew an iron, this is an iron from the turn of the century, isn't that great? Clearly you don't have to really be able to draw to do this, right? So don't freak out about the drawing. Okay, what was another story I told? The hair color story, right? So we got the hair color story with the funky woman. Okay, hair color, all right? Okay, and I could go on and on about the other stuff I talked about, right? Okay. So what was in the center? What color was that? Black. What was over here? Blue. Stories. What was off of that? What? The gun. Thank you. That was very kind of you to say the gun. The gun. What else? Anything else? Okay, what was over here? The paradigm stuff. What was off of that? Questions, visuals. Was there something over here? No, not really. Okay, okay. All right, so let's see how we did. Not well, clearly. No, here we go. I should have asked you the colors of these too, but okay. Okay, so how'd you do? I mean, there wasn't a whole lot there, but if we had filled out this whole thing, generally you would have done pretty well. Why? What happens in your brains when this is going on? Were you able to kind of see it sometimes? Did the pictures, bad as they were, might have helped with the memory? How about the colors? You could sort of see the colors. Yeah. So there are 4 elements to mind mapping, all of which are reflected up here. What are the 4 elements? Almost, but what are the 4 elements? Color. Thank you. So we got color here. What else? Yeah, we got the visuals, right? Okay, what else? Colors, visuals. Yeah, we could call it clustering, mapping, diagramming, whatever you want to call it, right? It's you know, they call it diagramming, if you will, and they're sort of, you're showing connections, right? How this is related to that. And the 4th one, it's almost a negative, but the 4th one is what? Keywords. In other words, these are not sentences, right? So you're not writing down, you should use triggers because of it's just trigger ideas, and you kind of get it. It's represented by keywords, okay? All right. So you're now proud graduates of the Bryan Mattimore mind mapping course here. And that's it. By the way, there's some wonderful videos online that do a better job of explaining than I just did. But now the question should be, and it has these 4 elements, and I'll write down keywords so we don't forget here. Now you might say, what? Who cares? What are you going to use it for, right? Okay. Did you just say that? Great, I'll answer that question. Okay. What could you use this for? I'll ask you guys, what could you use this for? Remember what we learned. Well, yes, thank you very much. To remember what you learned. Amazing. I had a friend who did a communications master's, a 2-year course. He got special, he actually lives in Chicago, he got a special allowance or dispensation to do 2 years and a year. He had to do a lot of fast talking. He's a really good salesman. So he did 2 years and a year. He mind mapped everything. The teacher's lectures, the notebooks he was reading, his papers, everything. Put them all around his room. And got clearly lost his girlfriend, right? No, okay. Put them all, and what happened when he's taking the tests? Let's see, it's in red, it's over the toaster, got it. So the memory thing, by visualizing things, it will help you remember. That's one thing. What else could you use this for? Yes?
Since I saw you speak last time, my
Yes.
students will do this with case study approaches.
Great.
So they can remember how they approached a certain case or disease population.
It's wonderful when you have, even if you have, like I was with the comptroller's office of the state of New York yesterday in Albany, New York. By the way, try to get from Albany to Chicago. It's not that easy, but anyway. And we were teaching them what? These auditors, how to be more creative. Oh my gosh, you know, it sounds like an oxymoron, but they actually have a very creative field about what you want to audit. They have very complicated projects, right? With all kinds of, they realized that if they mind map these things, it would create greater motivation, greater understanding, forest for the trees about what's going on and not going on, what the holes are, who should do what. So you can mind map bigger projects, case studies, whatever you want to call it. You can mind map lectures, you can mind map for your kids, have them mind map the stuff at school, et cetera, okay? What about if you have to give a presentation and you don't know where to start? Or write a paper like me and I didn't know where to start. You mind map, you brain dump, you do a massive brain dump of everything on your head that could go into that. And it's cool because it's not linear, right? Which is how our minds work. We went from what? Elephant to what? Travel in 4 steps. Well, that's, you know, we got all these things bouncing around and pinging around in our heads. So just do a brain dump of everything that could go into what you're trying to do. And then what? Then you can step back and say, oh my God, I got it. If I'm going to write a story about mind mapping, I'm going to start with the story, and then I'm going to go to the colors and whatever. Okay? So it's really, really good for that. What else? Again, if you're organizing a presentation, meeting notes, right? Anything. Okay? Take one out. So I want to tell you a story. It's really kind of cool. Let's see. How are we doing? Okay. So my business partner, Gary Fraser, he was at Unilever. He created Mentadent. I don't know if you remember that. By questioning the assumptions about the toothpaste business, that it has to come in a tube. Okay. That's a questioning assumptions technique. All right. Anyway, he went to Middlebury, and they had their 25th year reunion. And as part of their reunion, they have everybody send in like a one-pager about their life, right? Because it's a small enough school. It's not like Ohio State where it would be, you know, it's small enough. And they sent him samples of what people had written, right? And this one lady's writing, oh, my life is like the Thoreau class I took and blah, 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 you know, all this sort of BS, right? And he said, I'm not doing that. I can't face anything even remotely like that. You know, this sort of self-aggrandizing statement. So he put it off. He was a procrastinator. We've heard about procrastination. By the way, just so you know, the research with entrepreneurs is that procrastination is not necessarily bad. Because sometimes the procrastinators, this is in the Adam Grant TED Talk, sometimes the procrastinators are trying to make sure they get the proposition entirely right before they launch. Because once you launch, you're kind of stuck. So when you do, if and when you do your entrepreneurial ventures, go keep talking to people. At some point you have to launch, but you know, Theranos launched a little prematurely, I think, if you know the story and saw the documentary. Okay. All right. So he's a procrastinator, right? And he put it off, and it finally became the last day and had to send it in. And he said, oh my gosh, what am I, nuts? So he did a mind map of his life. Put a picture of his family in here. Work stuff, Cheeseboro Ponds, Unilever, blah, 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 blah. Vacations, Grand Canyon. Kids, you know, one's going to Middlebury. Hobbies, you know, boating. How long did it take him to do the mind map? It was like 5-7 minutes, right? And he had fun. He had fun doing it, right? By the way, as procrastinators, this is a trick you can use if you don't want to do something. We had a person at Unilever who didn't want to do their marketing plan. We said, don't do the marketing plan. Just do a mind map. it got her going, and then she wrote a marketing, she wrote a marketing plan after she did the mind map, because this got her into it, realized it wasn't that hard. So if you have a paper to write and you're freaking out about it, say, I'm not writing the paper, I'm doing a mind map. And then you'll find it's pretty easy. It's a way to trick yourself. Okay, so he did the mind map of his life. It took him 7 minutes. What did he then do? He sent it in. He didn't write it. He just sent in the mind map. Said, I'm done. So they printed it. You know, they got 500 of the things in there, all written out, and he's got this weird mind map in there, right? So at the reunion, people came up to him and said, you know, yours is the only one I looked at and read. You know, how was that trip to Grand Canyon? And my daughter's going to Middlebury too, and blah, 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 blah. Pretty powerful, right? Pretty powerful. And so, and the icing on the cake, and I'll end with this because we're out of time, right? Yes. If we have questions, which we'll have 2 minutes for questions. The icing on the cake was that the reunion committee contacted him next year and said, can we use you as an example of the way people might do their life stories? So, okay, so that's what I wanted to share with you guys. We've got all these different techniques. The takeaway from this is, guys, I do think it will be important for your careers to know at least some of this ideation stuff. You don't have to become an expert. You don't have to spend your life doing it as I'm doing. But these are not hard to learn, and they can have dramatic effect on your career, your business, your future. Really, they really can. And the work with this 3 billion or 5 billion or 6 billion, whatever it is, those are small numbers. I mean, Pepsi Max was one thing we did. That was $500 million a year. It strains credibility if I say 20 billion or something. But these ideas create opportunities. They create money. They create revenue. They create, you know, all that wealth, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so I'm done. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions. You're saying, I'm going to do the brainwalk thing now. What do I do? I'm freaking out. Feel free to call me. I'll talk you through it, right? And again, even if you do it poorly, it's better than not doing it, right? We're done. Any questions? We got a minute for questions. No, we're done. Okay. Yeah, we have one question here. Yes.
Playing the mashup with like figuring out, like if you're trying to figure out like
a new thing. Yes.
Does it have to be, you did like, I forgot what the category.
Yeah.
Industry.
That's a great question. You can vary these. You know, like when we did the Chips Ahoy, was it product forms? Was it packaging? Was it ingredients? Those can be varied. In this case, I picked technologies, because that's the future. I picked, you could do different industries. If it's not just health and sports, you could do different industries. And then over here, I did job titles. So writer, blah, 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 blah. You want 3 different categories of things, yes. Okay, great. Thanks, you guys. Really good.
Bryan, thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
I appreciate
Thanks,
that.
Paul.